So welcome everybody. I'm Jackie Hayden. I am President of the Academy of Medical Educators, and it's a real pleasure to welcome everyone here this evening, whether you be joining online or whether you're here in the audience. If the people who are joining online can just excuse me for a little minute, while I just do some housekeeping, because I have a fear that I'll forget at the end. So first of all, can I remind you all to turn your device to mute to prevent audio feedback during the session. And remember that the session is being filmed and live streamed out to our virtual audience. So try and limit movement throughout the auditorium as the session goes on. Then just a note for the face-to-face attendees tomorrow. For those of you who've been here today, can you make sure that you've got your badge so that you can swipe yourselves in, and that will make life easier? And can I remind you that for tomorrow you have to have an in-date lateral flow test, so you will probably need to repeat tonight or tomorrow morning because it's got to be within 24 hours. So that's my housekeeping, and I'd like to now just welcome you to the Academy of Medical Educators Awards and Calman Lecture Ceremony. And we're delighted that so many members and fellows are able to join us, whether that be in the audience or virtually. The Calman Lecture is perhaps the major event in the Academy calendar, and I'm really delighted that in our 15th year we're celebrating with one of our founders and founder honorary fellows. It's been 2 years like no others before that I can recall, and tonight is probably no exception. The Academy has taken stock during these difficult times and moved many of its activities, including our council meeting, online. We've also developed new skills in working virtually in educational activity. Our 3-day conference early in the autumn was a great success, thanks to the creativity of our team, as it has encouraged us to think about the impact of the pandemic, including the restoration following the period of lockdown, on medical educators and medical education. We're very proud of everyone who has adapted, modified their programs, and continued to ensure that the next generation have access to high-quality education and training. We're a long way from returning to normal, and I hope that all of us will be mindful of the needs of our students and trainees as we work our way through all the people waiting for operations and treatments, thinking creatively how to maximize learning. The Academy is intending to run a series of insight seminars during the coming year, building on our successful events of last month. And in addition, we're running our usual spring conference. We must also remember our own well-being. I'm acutely aware of how tiring the last year has been. The NHS continues to strive to maintain well-being, and I hope that all of us will contribute, taking time to restore our own strength and ensuring that practical and often simple measures are in place to maintain the well-being of those around us. For example, maintaining a civil and respectful culture and influencing decisions around time and space in our working environment, so that there's a protected area where we can decompress. Do you remember Roger Neighbour and his advocacy of housekeeping? The Medical Educators is the standard-setting body for medical, dental, veterinary, and physician associates educators. There are few, if any, standards for health educators in the world, and I'm delighted that despite everything else going on, we have revised our standards this year. It is a tribute to our administrative team, led by Tony Carlisle, and the Professional Standards Committee, led by Alan Dennison and Melvin Jones, that these are now published. The new standards reflect the growing interest in medical education as an academic career and in the importance of educational leadership and governance. We have hard copies available on request, and of course they're on our website. Sadly, not all of our team could be here tonight, and so we have a virtual stand. Please come and say hello if you have time tomorrow. Tonight, we welcome new members and fellows who have joined us since our last event in September, and 2 new honorary fellows. And I'm going to pass to Alan Dennison, who is standing in for Jamie Reid, our registrar, who couldn't be here tonight. Alan.
Thank you, President. So good evening. My name is Alan Dennison. I am a co-chair of the Professional Standards Committee of the Academy and a postgraduate dean in NHS Education for Scotland. So, firstly, the award of the membership of the Academy of Medical Educators. What you read before you are those people who have demonstrated recognition as members since September 2021. Membership of the Academy recognises demonstrated commitment and achievement as a medical educator across all domains of the professional standards. This will normally exceed level 1 of the standards and will meet most of the domains at level 2. A special mention to Theo Criswell and Mohammed Ismail Khan, who I believe are with us online today. The award of fellowship of the Academy of Medical Educators recognises the commitment and achievements on the screen since September 2021. And these 3 individuals have provided evidence of significant commitment, expertise and achievement as a medical educator, in the same way as fellowship of a Royal College signifies craft, knowledge and skills. The achievement demonstrated by fellows generally exceeds level 2, with significant achievement at level 3. The Academy also has associate membership, which recognises individuals who demonstrate a developing interest in medical education. To be recognised as an associate member, individuals must demonstrate a professional commitment to the core values and an understanding of the key responsibilities of medical educators. Associate members may already meet some elements of the professional standards at level 1. Student membership is aimed at undergraduates who already have an interest in medical education and wish to show their support for the Academy's objectives and values. Students may apply to convert to associate or full membership after graduation. So, we now turn to, we now turn to the award of honorary fellowship of the Academy of Medical Educators. The honorary fellowship is the Academy's highest award. It is intended for exceptional individuals whose contributions to medical education are often internationally recognised and who have made a significant contribution to medical education in the United Kingdom. And I'm delighted tonight to share with you the awards for 2 recipients. The first recipient is Professor William Reid, who I believe is joining us online. Professor Bill Reid has had a long and distinguished and rich career in medicine and in medical education. His list of roles and involvements at a senior level is very impressive and demonstrates the skill and acumen from which the NHS in Scotland and indeed the whole of the United Kingdom has benefited. He is currently a professorial fellow and academic advisor for the College of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine at the University of Edinburgh, where he takes a key role in the PhD and postdoctoral programmes, as well as developing the Train-the-Trainer programmes for international activity. After training, Bill began his clinical career as a consultant physician in geriatric medicine in Glasgow. There are few significant UK medical education organisations which he has not influenced since then. Bill was Dean of Postgraduate Medicine, South East Scotland, for 10 years until 2018, as well as Honorary Chair for the University of Edinburgh. He chaired COPMED UK from October 2014 until October 2017 and played a key role in the Shape of Training programme and has been a GMC Associate and Visitor since 2012. He was an invited member of the Wellcome Trust PhD Programmes Committee and Clinical Interview Committee from 2016 until 2020. He was also Chair of Health and Disability Review Steering Group, GMC, and Chair of Education and Training Committee for the Scottish Trauma Network. Bill has a long and successful record of innovative leadership in medical education. In all of his roles, he has been driven by the need to maintain, sustain and improve standards of healthcare delivery through effective education, training and supervision. His career has been the embodiment of improving care through teaching excellence. And so the Academy is delighted to recognise Bill's enormous contribution to medical education. And I'd like to invite you to join me in congratulating Bill. Our second recipient of Honorary Fellowship this evening is Professor Shona MacLeod. Most people will know that Professor MacLeod has been at the heart of the DEMEC organisation since it began in 2015. Her unstinting enthusiasm and formidable practicality has made this forum what it is, and it has been a great privilege for the Academy team to work with her. It is wonderful that we can celebrate with her in person today through Honorary Fellowship of the Academy. Shona's energy and enthusiasm for medical education is unparalleled. She has amazing talent for bringing together educational bodies and individuals for a common purpose and for diffusing tensions with her sense of humour and fun. Her clinical background is in general medical practice, moving into medical education as the GP Dean in East Midlands and then Postgraduate Dean and Director of Education and Quality. Now, as Health Education England's Deputy Medical Director, Shona has led educational reform with the well-being of our trainees at its heart. She was instrumental in developing the quality framework for Health Education England and has led Health Education England's extensive future doctor review and continues to lead national working groups, focusing on how to accelerate improvements in education and training, including HEE's Enhancing Junior Doctors' Working Lives and the Enhancing Generalist Skills programmes. Shona stepped into the role of acting medical director during the early intense months of the coronavirus pandemic and engaged with the 4 nations to modify rotations, ensuring safety of trainees and patients during these exceptionally challenging months. Shona holds honorary professorial positions at the Universities of Nottingham and Leicester, and has chaired both the Health Education England Dean's Committee and COPMED. Shona has achieved so much for our profession and continues to tirelessly strive for excellence in medical education. And so the Academy is delighted that we have this opportunity to recognise her contribution. And I'd like to invite Shona on stage to receive her award from the Academy's President. Shona. Thank you. I'll pass back to our President.
It's always wonderful to welcome our fellows, members, associates, and particularly to such esteemed honorary fellows. So let's now turn to the Calman Lecture. The Calman Lecture is the most significant event in the Academy of Medical Educators calendar. We're 15 years old and we want to mark this event by welcoming one of our founders. And tonight we're extremely fortunate that Professor Kenneth Calman is able to join us. We all have so much to learn from each other, and in his usual style of challenging the conventional, Ken is here to explore his career through a conversation with two of our upcoming educators. Before I introduce Ken, I want to tell you a little bit about Lewis Hendon John and Jamie Fisher. There are times in one's life where we think, wow, this is fantastic. And that was the case about 2 years ago when the Academy was approached by a group of clinical education fellows. This is a group of doctors early in their careers, both as clinicians and as educators, who had recognised the need for their own development and formed a network. Together, we ran a conference specifically for early career educators. The professionalism of the group was outstanding, and the creativity of some of the activity to maximise learning was significant. Jamie and Lewis were key to the success. Since then, they've joined the Council of the Academy and formed the Developing Medical Educator Careers Group. Members and non-members are welcome to join their activities, which are legion. For example, they were instrumental in organising a 3-day event earlier this year, considering interprofessional learning. They've hosted a workshop at AoME and now run evening events for early career educators to talk through some of the challenges and joys that each and every one of us face in our education activity and career. They're currently working on a series of podcasts exploring aspects of medical education. Moving now to Sir Kenneth Calman. We are delighted that Ken is joining us tonight to share his wisdom, and I guess he probably needs very little introduction. Sir Kenneth Calman graduated from the University of Glasgow and lectured in surgery before his appointment to the Cancer Research Chair of Oncology in 1974. He was appointed Dean of Postgraduate Medical Education in 1984 and was awarded an honorary doctorate in 1996, one of many. In 1989, he was appointed Chief Medical Officer at the Scottish Home and Health Department, and in September 1991, he became Chief Medical Officer in the Department of Health in London, where he served until 1998. During these years, he took a keen interest in medical education, supporting the postgraduate deans as they developed increasing responsibility for standards of medical education and training. Under his leadership, medical training moved from time served to standards achieved, and he was knighted in 1996. In 1998, he was appointed Vice-Chancellor and Warden at the University of Durham, and in 2006, he was appointed Chancellor of the University of Glasgow. Sir Ken has chaired and led many committees, including the Commission on Scottish Devolution. He has written widely on medical topics and poetry, and was the founder of the Academy of Medical Educators, being awarded honorary fellowship in 2009. At a personal level, I have learned so much from him. His quiet tenacity, his personal resilience, his humour and wisdom. His words of wisdom as he retired as Chief Medical stay with me, most importantly, to avoid giving advice and talk instead what he has learned. One of my fondest memories is when he joined a group I was leading and sat cross-legged on the floor, which was extremely disarming. So I hope that Ken, Lewis and Jamie will be beamed in, and if the technology's working, I'll go and sit down and we can enjoy their conversation.
Hello, good evening. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Jackie, for those kind words. I'm James Fisher, and I'm joined here by Lewis Hendon John and obviously Sir Kenneth Calman. I hope you're all either tucked away somewhere warm, enjoying a nice hot drink, or have enjoyed a full day at DEMEC today. And we're absolutely thrilled to have been asked to be here tonight to interview Sir Kenneth Calman, who, as you've heard, has had a phenomenal career and who the Calman Lecture is named after. So this evening, we've got about 45 minutes, and we're going to chat to Sir Ken about his career and things that he's learnt along the way. So, good evening, Ken.
Good evening to you, and thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful to see how far the Academy has come over the last 15 years, and I'm absolutely delighted.
Oh, I can't hear you, Lewis, I'm afraid. Oh, that's all right. Whilst Lewis is fixing his microphone, it wouldn't be a virtual event without someone's microphone pulling a funny. So really, Ken, we both read your book, and it's absolutely fascinating. And one of the questions we wanted to ask you firstly was, the book is called "It Started in a Cupboard," which is quite a funny title, and we were wondering if you could tell us a bit about that and why it's called that.
A pleasure. I was born on Christmas Day, 1941, just as the Second World War was getting underway. My father didn't go to the war. He worked in the shipyards about 20 minutes from our little council house. On 1951, 25th of June, he died suddenly. Heavy cigarette smoker, heart disease. So we were left in this little council house with my wee brother and myself, and my mother without very much money. She decided to take in boarders, and we had some from Jordan Hill College of Education, PE students as it happens. They slept in one bedroom, my brother and I in another, and my mother lay on the couch. Suddenly I realised there was nowhere for me to sit. I found a cupboard just in the hall, which I'd forgotten about, and it had a shelf just about high enough to be a desk. So I used that, but as you can imagine, there was no light, so I had to use candles. So my distinguished academic career began in a council house in a wee cupboard with candles.
Oh, you're still not coming through, I'm afraid, Lewis. I'm gonna have to take over for you. Thank you for that, Sir Ken. Within the first couple of chapters of the book, you really paint a picture of community, and you describe growing up on, as you call it, arguably the best housing estate in Glasgow. And really, we were wondering, how did that sense of community and that sense of community within the housing estate influence both your career and also how you viewed yourself as a clinician and leader?
It was a very powerful place to live. It was a nice council house estate, lots of facilities, and we deliberately put facilities like libraries and theatres and golf courses and things. We were about 200 yards from the local library, for example. My mother loved books, and we would be in the library once a week, and that actually made a big difference to me. My primary school was, again, just about 500 yards away from the house. Lots of good people there playing football, talking to each other. It was a lovely place to live. And we were outside most of the time. There were no cars, so we could play football on the roads without any bother. It gave me a sense of, certainly later in my life, what life could be like. And in spite of losing a father so early in my life, the people around it were so pleasant, so nice, looked after us, and it was a wonderful experience.
We're still struggling with you, Lewis, there. So in terms of that, Sir Ken, were there any people that particularly stood out for you as being influential from that community in which you grew up?
Yes, the local church was quite important to me, and that was one thing that helped me get through quite a lot of difficult times ahead. But also the Boys Brigade was great, and the school that I went to was just amazing, really. It was a school in the centre of town. It had a strong background in science and technology. Charles Rennie Mackintosh, the great architect, was a member of the school. And what was striking was not only was there a lot of discussion on science, but also on the arts. So I made pots, I did things with mechanical things. I wrote a book, handwritten, and put it together and bound it as a bound book. So I had a great range of things in the arts as well as the sciences, and that I think was very important for me.
And how do you think that range has impacted you on your career going forward? You mentioned the arts and plenty about sports and the arts throughout the book. How much of an influence has that had on you and your career?
Oh, very significant. And the arts, I think, really very important. My particular interest is in books and poetry, and that's just kept me going for years and years and years. And I loved it. And just a couple of years ago, I actually got a name lit in Scottish literature, which was very nice. And it was quite an interesting experience. First of all, giving some honorary degrees as Chancellor of the University, then going into the queue at the back to join the procession and to be given a namelet. It was very, very special.
Very good. And the school you went to, the Allen Glen School, you note in the book it was very heavily focused on science, and you mentioned that you were thinking about going into engineering, and that was sort of the basis of your thoughts. Can you tell us a bit about how you ended up picking medicine as a career?
Yes, you may not believe me, but we've got very close family, and on a regular basis, all the cousins used to meet. My brother and I were the youngest of the cousins. And at one of these events, one of my cousins said to me, "And what are you going to do then, Ken?" And I said, "Well, I think I'll be an engineer." And he said, "Why don't you do medicine?" And I said, "Okay, that sounds like a good idea." And took on the medical education. It was never in my thoughts for a while. They just said it, and I thought that sounds good, and I've never really regretted it.
That's brilliant. Hopefully, you can hear me back now. Very nice to join in the conversation. As Jamie said, it wouldn't be an online conference without someone being on mute for far too long, but at least we realised this time. I found it really interesting what your kind of decision to go into medicine and the way that you kind of arrived at it almost by chance, and what might have been an incredibly different life if you hadn't gone down the route of medicine. It's quite interesting because you obviously hadn't spent years and years preparing to try and get into medical school, which sometimes people do in the stages now. And in the book, you have a really interesting quote in which you talk about how the CV can't be the measure of a man. It would never convey the true measure of a man. The CVs of even illustrious men never do. And I wonder what you think about the kind of process now for applying to medical school, and the fact that a lot of people have to, or seem like they have to have a lifelong commitment to medicine before they've even started.
Yes, it certainly was different in my days. It was much easier in a sense to get into medical schools as long as you had the right kind of higher results in school. I think it is very difficult now, and to have that commitment very early on is a good thing, of course, very, very positive. But if you were unable to get into medical school, it would be difficult. So the way I got into it was slightly unusual, slightly unpredictable, but I never regretted it.
I think that sort of sums up your career, really, slightly unpredictable. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about after graduating how your interests in a clinical specialty began. I know that you describe that you were heading towards dermatology, which is quite a way away from where you ended up.
Yes. In the middle of the medical degree, I did a BSc, an intercalated degree. It wasn't very common at the time, but I did one in biochemistry. It was great. I really enjoyed it. And as part of that, I did a project with the professor of dermatology, a biochemical project. When I finished the degree and came back into medicine, he said, "Why don't you continue it?" So I continued on Saturday mornings and evenings with the project. And in fact, graduated a few years after I graduated in medicine. So that's why it changed. I then got an invite to be a lecturer with the Professor of Surgery, Sir Andrew Watt Kay. It was a very distinguished unit at the time, and I really couldn't say no to that. I joined the unit, and it was really marvellous. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I ended up as a registrar in surgery with a particular interest in vascular and transplant surgery. Kidney transplants were coming in, and liver transplants almost there. So I really enjoyed my surgical experience. Had very, very good people to work with, and that was most important. Because of the interest in immunology, they decided it would be a good idea if I went to somewhere and took more experience there. And I came to London into the Institute of Cancer Research and had a wonderful year there. At the same time, I had links with the Marsden and St George's. They were right at the heart of um, building new techniques in cancer areas. I went back to Glasgow. When I got back to Glasgow, the Cancer Research Campaign, as it was at the time, gave the university £500,000 to set up the first oncology unit in Scotland. It was quite difficult to find somebody who would take the job, and they asked me about people I'd met in London at the time, and I gave them all the good names of really great people. None of them said yes, so they didn't quite know what to do. And there's a little story of a colleague of mine, Stuart McPherson, who happened to be in Chicago for a conference and met Sir Andrew Watt Kay there. Sir Andrew said to him, "Do you think we Kenny could do this?" And Stuart said, "Yes, I think we Kenny could." And I became Professor of Oncology at the age of 32. There was no staff, no buildings, no research, no patients, and it was an interesting beginning.
Fair dues.
And I was wondering if we could ask you a little bit more about that, about the process of kind of working right at the cutting edge of a new specialty where the science was just being developed, and working alongside that in a clinical sense. How did you find the process of kind of creating that new role from scratch for yourself?
It was difficult, not surprisingly. It took a lot of time, but I was very fortunate in having people as part of the team, and we worked very much as a team as we developed and built up experience. It was interesting that for the first 6 months, people who were referred for treatment died in a month without treatment. That's the kind of patient load that I saw. And I think it was natural that people were saying, here's a new specialty. I don't think they can do much about it. We'll try, we'll send them a few difficult patients and see what happens. So it took a little while to make people think that we could do something very reasonable and positive. And the team worked very well. The biggest learning experience was with patients, and I'll say a little bit more about that if you want in a moment. But it was quite difficult building up the team. And when I left 10 years later, we really had quite a good group of people working hard, linked into the medical regimes around about. We had a whole series of subcommittees on different cancers, and these were all chaired by people outside the department, so that they felt part of it too. So it was great. I really enjoyed it.
And please do tell us some of your reflections on those interactions that you had with patients at that time.
Well, it was quite clear as I met them that they knew more about cancer than I did. They knew more about the kinds of problems that cancer patients have and how to deal with them. My wife and I invited a number of them up to our house one evening just to talk about it, and that we found very useful. We did it again, and we realized that in fact this wasn't about us, it was about them. And we started a series of monthly meetings with any of the patients and their families who wished to come, and not everybody wished to come, but who would come and be part of what was going on. And at the time, something between 30 and 40 small groups were set up across the west of Scotland, where patients could meet other patients, talk to each other, help each other, and provide significant support. That was such a powerful learning experience for me when I realised that other people were better than I was at doing things, and to encourage it to continue.
Fabulous, thank you. And so during this time of kind of this new specialty that you were leading the way on, you had to obviously display a range of different kind of leadership skills, and you talk in the book about how you often tried to vary your approach to leadership throughout your career. How did you kind of go about the different approaches with all the different members of clinical staff and things like that that you had to interact with, as to kind of why and how you took the approaches that you did?
I think I say in the book that I'm not really an aggressive person. I don't shout at people very often. And I tend to try to make the best of all the situations I'm in. And one of the things that I've realized is that some of the staff that I had, in fact, a lot of them, were actually extremely good. They didn't need me to tell them what to do. And it was much more of a team approach to things, encouraging them to be part, encouraging them to take things forward, encouraging them to get the kind of experience they need before moving on to their next program. So a lot of what I wanted to do was not about getting angry with people and saying, I'm the boss, you must believe me. It was entirely different, and it seemed to work quite well.
And I think you actually quote Alex Ferguson in your chapter of your book talking about leadership, saying that your job was to make everyone understand that the impossible is possible, and that is the difference between leadership and management. And I really like that, and I think that sums up what you've said really quite nicely.
Well, he says something else that his father told him: when you get up in the morning, don't put your slippers on, put your shoes on and get ready to get out, not to sit about in the house. So he says, and I've met him several times now, and he's just great.
Fair dues. Okay. And I don't think that you've ever sat around. From reading your book, I don't think there would have been any time. And on that note, because otherwise we won't get a chance to talk about anything later on. One thing I would like to ask is just about your time in oncology and palliative care. Is that you talk about being at the cutting edge of science with new chemotherapy regimens coming in and a real focus on how treatment was changing. But you also reflect on how important it is to recognise that there's a patient at the end of all of this. How did you find yourself balancing that at the time with all of this new cutting edge? And sort of really thinking about the current time with everything that we're now learning about coronavirus and how we can ensure that we keep the patient at the centre of what we're doing.
Well, I think that you've just said the answer to the question: the patient coming to the centre of the argument and how things come together. I mean, if you think about education, there are, I think, three parts to education. One is learning, and you can do that in a wide variety of ways, from going to lectures to reading books to watching things on television. The second is teaching. And if you learn things, one of your responsibilities is to teach other people and to keep that going. But the third thing is that knowledge is always changing. And when I graduated in 1967, more than 50 years ago. And if you think what's changed, not just in oncology, but any branch of medicine over that time, it's amazing. So you've got new things, and these new things then have to be put into the learning program, and these things need to be taught in a different kind of way. And it's a continuing process of learning. And I think that was the big lesson, that just to read the book today of what to do in oncology is not quite enough for the next day and the next day and the next day. You have to continue to learn.
Thank you. So I think we'd like to go on and ask you a little bit more about medical education now. This has been a significant kind of part of your life. At one point in the book, you talk about, I think you say, why on earth would I want to leave a busy and successful unit that has a great future to go on to medical education? Well, I do like a wee adventure. And while that, is obviously humorous, I think it can resonate with a lot of people in medical education that perhaps a role as an educator might not get the plaudits that it deserves. And I'm just wondering, what if it wasn't seen as such a successful potentially career, what was it that intrigued you about medical education?
Well, part of my program of learning had been about how do I learn more effectively myself? And secondly, how can I learn from patients? And how can they learn from me? So learning was right at the heart of all of these things. The question is, why did I leave oncology and go to a boring job as a postgraduate dean? In fact, it wasn't, and I knew it wouldn't be. I knew it was an area which needed to be developed. A lot of the oncology work that we did, we had educational programs and work that brought people in and helped each other. So I realized that this was an opportunity of providing additional support to people in medical education, helping that and developing that. And later on, when I moved into other parts of education, I was able to help postgraduate deans, for example, do, I think, a better job at bringing education together and ensuring that the education met the requirements of patients and their families.
And on that note, really, you echo that in the book, saying that the purpose of medical education is to prepare a person with the skills and knowledge and values to practice as a doctor. And you also say that you shouldn't let your degree get in the way of your education. And I just really wonder what you think we can do as educators to make sure we're not just thinking, how do we get our students over the next hurdle, that next exam, but also how do we really encapsulate that spirit of creating a good doctor?
I think it was don't let the degree get in the way of your education was really a comment on that sometimes you can be so focused on the process of education you don't realize what it's all about in the first place. It is about helping people to live better, have a better quality of life, and to enjoy life itself. And that, I think, is sometimes in degree programs could be seen to be missing. And I wanted to be sure that that wasn't missing in the process, that it was very much part of the whole thing and what was required.
Yeah. And so you've been obviously heavily involved in medical education throughout your career and instrumental in setting up the Academy of Medical Educators. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the kind of process of setting it up, what you felt the importance of having an Academy of Medical Educators was at the time, and how did you go about kind of enacting upon that?
I mean, I think I've said already quite a lot about how I thought education mattered to me and to patients and to the public generally in terms of my work in public health, for example. It matters so much, and the key was to bring that together. And again, I recognised by wandering around the country just how good people were, how much people enjoyed education, thought it was important, would like to have made it better and easier to handle. And it seemed to me and to others at the time that this was the opportunity to bring all of that together, that enormous resource, enormous experience, and to use that to help other people coming into medicine and going through medicine. And I think that was the purpose of all of it. And it was a great thing. And I'm just so delighted that 15 years on, we're at this stage. And I'm absolutely, it's tremendous. Great.
Brilliant. And as someone who was both a student at Glasgow all the way through to becoming a chancellor, what are the big things that you think have changed within the university setup during that time?
I think, first of all, it's been made to work harder. We worked quite hard as medical students, but it's getting more difficult. Secondly, the knowledge base is changing and changes quite rapidly. And the fact that you've learned something when you were a medical student doesn't mean to say that it will not be there when you become a graduate and go into clinical practice. So much of it, in terms of how universities have changed, has been in that. But also, I think, the methodology has changed. When I was an undergraduate, the big lectures were the thing that happened. That was beginning to change, and now it's changed, I think, quite significantly, particularly with the pandemic. The way in which students, young doctors, older doctors, come together and learn from each other. That's so much faster than it used to be. And meetings like this show how you can do it from your home. And I think we need to be sure that we use these new techniques to make it easier for people to learn, and at the same time broaden their ideas. Libraries have always been important to me, for example, and it's wonderful to see how libraries are coping with the differences in learning, and that I think will also continue.
I think that's a really interesting point, and something that you touch upon on the books about how we can all learn from each other. And you say about how much you learnt yourself during your role as an educator and how much your students have actually taught you. And I think for me, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about the process of spending time with the students and getting to have this role as an educator, that actually I learned so much myself during the process.
Can I just add a little bit there? I realized that just a year or so back, before the pandemic, walking past the university library, there were lots of seats and tables. You don't have that in the library. But these were students talking to each other, using the facilities of the library and the space, and developing thoughts and ideas that way. And I thought that was a wonderful way to use a library, bringing people together to learn with each other.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think Lewis and I, having worked together on plenty of projects, have really enjoyed is the thrill of coming up with a new idea and a new way of doing something that perhaps hasn't been done before. And that's a really exciting time to be an educator. And you talk about that coming up with a new ethical program and the way you went about that. And we were wondering how you got inspiration for how you would change up your teaching. How would you go about doing sessions differently? And where did that inspiration come from?
Well, I worked very closely with a chap called Robin Downey, who was Professor of Moral Philosophy at the university. And we did a few pretty ordinary talks on medical ethics. But we then realized that the students were actually pretty good at this, understood a lot of the problems and wanted something more. So we thought, well, why don't we have a little class on literature and medicine? So we started this free, open sessions, and 30 to 40 people came along. We had books that we discussed. We let them choose books to discuss. It opened up a whole new area of thinking about medicine in different ways. It wasn't terribly medical at times. It was about what was in the books, but it was a remarkable way of opening up their ideas, their thinking in different ways about medicine and working together. And it was for Robin and I a wonderful experience too, being part of something as interesting as that. And it's developed further since then.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the amount of innovation that's happened in medical education, absolutely fantastic. And you only need to look at a conference like this to see all of the great ideas that are still going on. Hopefully will continue to progress throughout the years. I think just in the interest of time, while we've got you here, I think it would be remiss of us to not ask about your role as the Chief Medical Officer, first of Scotland and then of England, as this is a role that's now very much in the public eye. Can you tell us a little bit about your time and your experiences? What was it like being the Chief Medical Officer?
It was a remarkable privilege. And again, using my background in medical education and building teams, a lot of it was about bringing people together, helping people to understand quite difficult clinical problems. Speaking to the Secretary of State, for example, about HIV infection or BSE, they have to be helped to understand that. But I was enormously impressed by how politicians, the ones I met certainly, were able to get into a very difficult area. And I mean, for example, I used to see the Secretary of State on Monday mornings. She would be out in her constituency over the weekend, and on Monday she came in one Monday and said, "I hear that cancer services could be better. They're not as good as they should be. What are you going to do about it?" And I said, "Well, we'll look into it." And a year later, we had a new cancer system in the country. And working with people like that mean that you can actually get things done and change things. And a lot of my experiences in Whitehall and in the Scottish office were about trying to bring new ideas to the front of the politicians and help them to understand what the real problems were. It would be extraordinarily difficult just now to be Chief Medical Officer in this kind of pandemic. And I think Chris Whippy's done a great job in bringing things together, but very, very difficult to do.
No, absolutely, and I'd echo that about Chris Whitty, and it sort of led me on to a question that I've been thinking ever since I've read your book about. You talk about the importance of language and communication as a CMO, and you note that during the HIV epidemic within Scotland at the time, that you created a campaign of take care, and then you felt that take care of the ones you love was a better almost tagline to get the message across to the population. And I wonder how much your interest in the arts and poetry and language affected you in terms of how you were a communicator as CMO.
But it's right at the heart of what you do almost as CMO in terms of communicating issues and to use the right words. One of the most difficult words I had to use was safe. And eventually gave up using the word because I think it's too difficult. And how do you communicate risk to patients in a way which they can understand? And that's not to say that they're not right. It's just making them understand what the issue is, and that they can ask questions and take things forward. It's very much at the heart of things. Now, I think I remember at least one occasion when I used the word safe. And safe to some people means no risk. To other people it means low risk. And how do you distinguish between no risk and low risk? And if we use the word safe, for example, it really is impossible to use. So that the language, I think, is interesting, and being able to look beyond medicine into other areas, again, gives you some ideas of how things could be improved. And for patients, this could be a better way forward.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing that we can all take into our practice, how to do with the way that we as individuals communicate. And as you say, particularly around things like risk is particularly important. I was wondering if we could ask you, so you were had the role as Chief Medical Officer of Scotland and then moved down to be Chief Medical Officer in England. And you said that you still had a lot of projects ongoing during this time. And as someone who's always got the next project on the horizon, looking at the next big thing, not that I've done anything as influential as the Chief Medical Officer, not yet, but I wondered how you managed to reconcile kind of moving on when you still had lots of things kind of ongoing, how you dealt with that.
Yeah, I think it is difficult, because if you do as I've done, hugely enjoyed almost every area I've been part of, moving on is quite difficult, and leaving behind areas that you like to take forward and do in a different way, but you can't. You have to get out and move away into something else. And I've been fortunate in that I've always been able to move forward. There's a little bit in the book story that I use when people are sometimes asked, what do you want to do for the future? And they tell me all the things that they'd like to do. And I usually say, well, what I want to do is not to grow up, but to continue to look at new things and different things. And maybe that's what my life's been about. It's been enjoying doing slightly different things and moving on.
Thank you. I think that really describes your career really quite well. And one of the things that seems to thread through your book is almost a degree of serendipity. And one of the things that I've had my dad quote at me all my life is that the more you practice, the luckier you get, which is, I think, a quote from a South African golfer.
Yeah.
But to some degree, I think luck is a huge part of all our careers and how we end up where we are. Do you have any thoughts on serendipity and your own career and how you've gone through?
Well, I happen to agree with what you just said. I mean, I was just, as I was writing the book, to think back to when I was a little boy in a housing estate in Glasgow. I would have no idea, no even thoughts of what I might have done, and I think that's been part of my enjoyment in life. The happiness it's brought me has been doing slightly different things, doing different things, being happy in doing little things, being able to change things. And there's a little bit in the book about my motto and what it should be. And I needed this to be Chancellor at the University of Glasgow. I needed a coat of arms and a little motto. And it was an interesting thought. What would your motto be? Mine was Cum Scientia Securo. Through science and knowledge, I help others. I think that is it. That sounds a bit pretentious, but it's really, I think, what it's been about for me. How can I help other people and make life happier for them, even though it may make life difficult for me?
Thanks. That's something that I wanted to ask about as well, actually, is obviously you've done a huge amount for countless numbers of patients. The impact that you've had on the kind of medical profession in this country can't really be overstated. And I wondered, with so much work going on, how you found any time for yourself. When did you sleep? When did you manage to eat? How did you find trying to handle all of that work with maintaining a life?
Well, I get up very early in the mornings, and that gives me a little bit extra time. But I think it's recognizing that doing these other things and different things really makes a difference. And part of the reason for writing this little book was to say thank you to my wife and children for being so good to me and letting me do things. And it would have been very difficult without their support and help. So I'm very lucky in that sense. But the ability to do things, I mean, I did 3 university courses while I was CMO England, I think. And that was great, and it gave me something different to do. So I think it's about trying to not grow up too quickly and remain able to change and develop.
Blimey, 3 university courses whilst you were CMO. That makes me feel tired just thinking about it. I suppose we're coming to the end of our allotted time, and I just wanted to personally say thank you. And I just wonder if I could ask you one final question from me, and it's about your father and a point you make very early on in the book, where you talk about smoking and you talk about what it would have taken to make a heavy smoker like your father stop, and you say that that's a question that's followed you throughout your career. And I wonder what thoughts you've had on that as you've gotten older, considering your experiences as a clinician and a public health leader, and how your thoughts on that have changed throughout your career.
Well, it's quite remarkable looking at the change in cigarette smoking in this country over the last 50 years. I was watching a television program last week or the week before with lots of photographs of Glasgow, and everybody smoked. It was just, that's what you did. And the illnesses related to that are just too terrible to talk about. And things have changed. And I think it's partly because the doctors, the public health specialists have tried to make it clear that doing things like that really can significantly affect your life. And watching my father die, in fact, I didn't see him, he just died, when I was 9 and my wee brother was 6, said something to me about things needed to change. And I was fortunate in being able to get into a place and an opportunity which things could change, perhaps. And it's just wonderful to see how much that change has occurred, and the benefits of that have been enormous.
Thank you for that, Soka.
Thank you very much. And yeah, huge thanks from me as well. I thought if we could perhaps end with what might seem like a slightly random question, but in throughout the book, you kind of talk about your love of music, and you've obviously not only had a distinguished medical career, but have been involved in playing lots of music as well. And you say that some music always kind of tends to make you cry. And I just wondered if there are any particular pieces of music that you feel like always bring a tear to your eye.
Oh dear. My music was mainly guitar and banjo, and I played in a jazz band, which was great. I think the one bit that makes me cry is called The Irish Blessing. It's a lovely, quiet, beautifully sung hymn, and as Chancellor, I have to climb up a little set of steps into a little pulpit and give the degrees out from there. And at the end of the ceremony, we stand up and the choir sing the Irish Blessing. And it's quite difficult to get down the stairs because I've got tears in my eyes. My little granddaughter's called Grace, and my mother's called Grace, and singing Amazing Grace is very difficult. Can I thank you for your questions, by the way? I've really enjoyed speaking to you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been fascinating to read your book and learn more about your career.
Yeah, we had to whittle down our question list quite significantly. I think we had about 15 questions about your time just as CMO of Scotland, let alone postgraduate dean, chancellor, etc., etc. So thank you so much for your time and honesty and asking for us to interview you.
Thank you very much indeed, and every success in the future, and a big cheer for the Academy. What a great work it's done.
Thanks very much.
So, thank you very much, all three of you. What a wonderful way to end this evening.